Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Chambers. Hello and welcome to everyone that is joining me. I hope you are safe and happy and healthy wherever you are. But it is time right now to get comfortable, get that favorite drink, get that blanket or favorite pet and curl up, and let's start to talk about travel. That's right. So today I'm particularly excited because we're going to be talking about traveling to Budapest. That's right, Budapest. And not only are we going to talk about why Budapest is an underrated destination, I'm also going to talk about things to do while traveling to Budapest, as well as my recommended hotel stays there in the city of Budapest. And stay tuned to the very end because I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for staying safe while traveling. So let's dive right in. I was really blessed to get a chance to travel to Budapest, or as most people pronounce it, Budapest. But we were originally going to stay with a friend in Germany. And plans got changed and shifted. And when that happened, we had to figure out different accommodations, and we started debating whether we even wanted to travel around Germany because we were going to see our friends and stay with them. And now that we had more of an open itinerary, it gave us a chance to really explore different options to go travel over there. And we ended up traveling to Prague and then traveling to Budapest. So we split the time up, and I'll do another podcast about Prague because it is a wonderful city, and if you haven't been there, it is probably one of my top European cities to visit. But Budapest was actually a surprise to me and has become one of my favorite cities. Now, I haven't been to every city in Europe, so I'm sure that list will continue to change as I travel more. But it was one of the most surprising destinations that I never thought that I would be going to. And when we got there, it screamed a huge likeness to me. I should say, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm a water polo player. For those of you that listen to the podcast, you might have heard me reference, my accolades in swimming and water polo. But this country, Hungary, is known for its water polo. That's like their national sport. So for me, it was really exciting because when you travel in hotels when you travel in airports and you see all the iconic athletes and sports that go on, when you go to Argentina, you see, Messi, for soccer all over the place. You come into the United States, you'll see, basketball and football and all these, professional athletes and things like that are in different cities. Well, when I got off the plane, we got off this small plane in Budapest and we walked right into the airport, and right on the wall there was this really big picture of a guy playing water polo. And now most people would just think, oh, he's doing something in the water and not really know what that is. But I got really, really excited. One of the unfortunate things that I didn't get to experience was getting to see a match there in Hungary because the national team was traveling. But that's definitely a bucket list thing for me to go back, not only to experience the city again, but to get another glimpse of more of a Hungarian experience in their national sport. But Budapest is a very interesting city because it has a lot of rich history. Not all the history in it is wonderful, but, when you talk about history within certain cities, especially cities like Budapest, where, both World War I and World War II, had a big part in what happened around the area and to the people of Hungary. It changes and shapes the city. Now we can appreciate it, but it has gone through a lot of different changes. And there's even some of the buildings there where you can see destruction or even bullet holes from things that have happened within the wars. And I think it's really brilliant how they've incorporated in keeping some of those things there with some of the buildings they've refurbished and things like that, but preserving a little bit of that history, because it is tragic, but learning from our mistakes is always important with history. And this gives us a chance to really get a feel for what the city has gone through. And I think that was one of the other surprising things about it. Now, not only has it, have rich history and so many different things to go to, but it's right there on the river Danube. So it's pronounced Danube, D-A-N-U-B-E, Danube. And it splits the city right in half. So between the city, you have the Buda side and then the Pest side, or the Pest side. So that's why it's Budapest. So it's split into two cities. And the architecture is just brilliant. It's just brilliant. And the food, to me, was great. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next segment. But you're not going to find a place that you're going to eat that you're not going to enjoy the food. I will say that. Now, if you're a vegetarian, this might not be the place to experience the most wonderful set of food, because potatoes will probably be close to the closest thing to a vegetarian dish that you're going to find. So if you're not a meat lover or a gamey type of person, like those game meats, this might not be your favorite city as far as food goes, but there's definitely options for every type of eater out there. And not only is the city vibrant with food and restaurants and the wonderful river that goes through where you can take cruises up and down, but it has several universities there, and it has just become a little bit of a small little hotspot for tourism. And there's so many different things. And one of the things that I really loved also was the wine, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So Budapest was not really a very large city. It is the capital city, so that is another thing, and which anytime a country, its capital city is there, and usually offers a lot of different things to travelers, but it's also a great place for business that comes through there. It's very important in regards to that. And as the capital, it's very important to Hungary because you have Parliament there. And one of the interesting things that I find about the city of Budapest is that even though they're part of the United Nations or with the euro, they tend to still use their own money, which is very interesting. So I think that's, to me, was very interesting. Even though you can use euro, they tend to use their own type of money. And one thing that they like to do is stick to traditions. And one of the traditions that I found out, that you don't clink beer glasses. Okay, it seems kind of funny to do, but I had to look this up. Why? Because I was told, and I never really thought about it. I just respected the fact that I was a guest in the country, and I wanted to do things the proper way. So I went and looked it up, and the tradition of locals in Budapest, goes all the way back to 1848. So I mean that's kind of a lot of history right there. So 1848, when the Hungarian Revolution Hungary was overthrown by revolution by the Habsburg. So to celebrate the victory in Vienna, Austrians everywhere clinked beer to show their joy for the victory. And that didn't sit well with the Hungarians. So for 167 years after this has passed, the Hungarians have not forgotten, and they vowed never to clink beer glasses. So you may not realize that you're doing it, but if you're out and you're cheersing something, just be aware that is probably not a favorite, or you might get an eye look from, a local or something like that, or maybe they might say something. Now, I never experienced any any bit of rudeness or any bit of area that I stayed in that was just unhospitable. The people of Hungary and in Budapest were fantastic, and they were warm and welcoming, and I couldn't even describe the kindness that was shown over there. So getting to travel over there was such a treat and just a joy and a blessing. And the city itself is wonderful with architecture. Just it has a mix of this neo-Baroque and like a lot of this classical style of architecture, and you can see the areas that they really have tried to preserve the architecture. And even when you have a little bit more of a modern feel to it, the architecture really screams out to you, a Hungarian architectural city, and it really matches well with everything. And for a city that's gone through so many transitions with the wars and so many things that have been rebuilt and fixed and changed over the years, it really still has a sense of identity that is unique. And you're not going to be able to find that in every city that you go to in Europe. But for Budapest, it's a very unique place. And we were traveling. Everyone always asks, well, when's the best time to travel? Because, you want to go during the warm times. But to be honest, we were traveling during March when we went, around mid to late March. And so we caught a little bit of some cooler weather, which was, to me, great. Not so much for my wife when we were traveling. But I found it refreshing because you just had this nice breeze, and it was great to be outside. And it was right on the tail end, and I highly recommend this time to go. Like right there on late March, like mid to late March, maybe even to April, you're going to get that spring weather that comes out, and it is the most gorgeous weather you could possibly imagine. So imagine 75 degrees, sunny, no clouds, right? That's the kind of weather you're going to get right there in their spring. Now, every place has weather where it rains and things happen, but that's what we ended up doing. And the really neat about going in March and April into the city is that you have the Spring Festival. And the Spring Festival is just like a market square that kind of is erected with traditional foods and local wines and vendors and things like that. You get to walk around. There's marionette puppet shows and all kinds of really unique and interesting things. And the concert hall, which is world class, and we got a chance to see a performance in their concert hall. Their main concert hall was just absolutely gorgeous, architecturally stunning, and they always have very special guests and performances going on, especially during that spring festival. So any chance that you get to go, there's not really a bad time. I'm going to put that out there. I don't feel there's a bad time to go visit Budapest. Even if you get snow on the ground, you're going to be able to find things to do. You're not going to want to stay in your hotel, even with snow on the ground. You're going to want to get out. You're going to want to go experience the city, and it's just a really unique place. It's also very easy to get around, whether you're taking a taxi or you get on the train. I refer to as the subway, which I was completely wrong, but the trams or their train system is highly, highly recommended. It's a lot easier than dealing with taxis. We like to walk as much as possible when we're traveling, and Budapest is a city that you can do that, but when you're going back and forth to different sides of the river, of the Danube River, because the castle's on one side, Parliament's on the other side, I advise you to take either a taxi or find some more. I really advise a taxi if you're jumping back and forth. Now, we did walk across the bridge, but there are parts of the city that you want to get to, and it takes a little bit more time. But the trams and the taxis are very, very well serviced, and they're not expensive, so I highly recommend those. So when you go, I wouldn't even worry about renting a car. I would get a taxi from the airport, which is what we did, and take you right to whatever hotel you're at. It's always good to research your area that you're staying in anyway. I had referenced that in one of my earlier podcast, but you want to get a sense of the city, and the best way to do it is getting out and exploring by foot, in my opinion. If you got to get somewhere, or you have a reservation or a tour that you've scheduled or something, then obviously, yes, get that transportation. But in Budapest, the trams will be some of your favorite transportation. We did a city bus tour, which I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next segment, but I recommend that. But just the city in general, I can't say enough nice things. So Budapest, it's one of those destinations that I'm gonna highlight throughout this entire podcast, but you should really consider it. It is just rich in history, culture, food, wine, everything that you would want for a European city. So let's dive into a little bit more of it. But coming up after the break, we're going to talk about things to do while traveling there. And make sure you stick with us to the end, because I'm going to give you my top 10 tips about staying safe when you travel.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. We were just talking about Budapest and the wonderful things that make up the city and why you should go there and why not. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's a wonderful part of Europe. It's a wonderful city, wonderful culture, wonderful people, wonderful food. I mean, I'm using wonderful a lot. So you guys need to get out there to visit Budapest. Make it part of your trip. So if you're kind of hopping around or doing that tour through Europe, I'm going to highly, highly recommend that you stop there. Now, when you get to Budapest, there are things that I'm going to recommend here to do. I don't think you can do any wrong. I personally don't think you can do any wrong in Budapest. But there are some things that I want to highlight that we found and we discovered when we were there. And had I known more about that prior to going, I probably would have carved out more time to do those things or spend more time doing those things. And wine is actually really big in Budapest. The wine region over there is fantastic. They're a city that loves wine. And not only do they love wine, but they love a sweet wine. Their local wine is called Tokaj, and it's world renowned. In fact, it's won awards on international levels. There's different forms of Tokaj. When I say forms, I really mean sweetness. Because it's a dessert wine, it's a sweet wine, and the more expensive the wine is, the sweeter it's going to be. And you'll see on the bottle that when you get a bottle of Tokaj, it has stars. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe up to 6 stars, and 6 being like the highest rated. But also, depending on your level of sweetness or your taste, you may not want a really, really sweet wine. But we ended up finding a bottle that was considered the wine of the century, which I think was a 1971 or 1972 bottle of Tokaj. I'd have to go back and double check that, but it was somewhere in the 70s, and it was a bottle of Tokaj, and we bought it, and we still haven't opened it to this day, and that was over 10 years ago when we got it. So hopefully it's still good. But we did buy it just for that. But you can buy a bottle of Tokaj, a Hungarian bottle of wine, at most large wine vendors and places, stores here locally in the U.S. It's imported. But it's when you get it there and you get something that's locally done there, it's so much better. So much better. So I highly recommend that. And the food, they use a lot of paprika. So if you don't ever use paprika in your cooking, you're going to get a lot of taste of spice of that flavor of the paprika, which to me just smells wonderful. And you can get paprika anywhere in Budapest or in Hungary. It's all over the place. And it's used in the cooking. And now not every dish is made with paprika, but it's an ingredient that is something that locals use a lot over there. So just be prepared about that. My favorite dish over there was the goulash, which is like a stew, and it's, meats and potatoes and, paprika, and it's kind of put together. And you'll find that there are different forms of goulash around that region, not necessarily in Budapest, but different regions in the area. Like when we were in Czech Republic, they had a goulash too, but it was very different from the Budapest goulash. And I liked the goulash in Budapest. So I'm a meat and potatoes guy, and I like the gamey foods in that region. So for me, this was fantastic. Their dumplings were, it's like stew with potatoes and dumplings and this sauce and the spice. Oh, it's so good. So if you can't tell, my mouth is watering. I might even have to stop the podcast to go find something to eat thinking about all of this. And like I mentioned earlier, if you're a vegetarian, it's not going to be as friendly as far as that, in that sense, with some of the more of the local foods, but there are plenty of options and vegetable-based dishes, and there's options for everyone wherever you go. Just be aware that it is when you get something like goulash, it's going to have meat and things like that in it. So if you haven't really read up on that, I'm just going to forewarn you for any vegetarians out there. And, so we have the wine, we have, the local drink, there's so many sights to see in Budapest, and I'm going to only touch on a couple. And these were highlights on my trip that I completely enjoyed and thought that they were worth it. And the first one I'm going to jump to is kind of obvious. It's Budapest Parliament. And once you get into the city and you're traveling around, you're going to see the massive dome and you're going to see Parliament. Any place like that architecturally, to me, is fantastic. Tour of Parliament, and you can get a guided tour, and they have headsets if they don't speak the language, or if you're not on an English tour, or if you hire a private tour guide, so that they have different forms of audio that you can get and hear the history of Parliament and go through and why there's a certain amount of steps in Parliament and things about the architecture and the building itself and what it was used for prior to and how it came to be. So it's very interesting. If you're a history buff, again, I've kind of highlighted this earlier in the segment, in the first segment, it's going to be a dream city for you because I'm a history buff and I love it. I love seeing how what has happened and has shaped and formed a city and a culture, and just even some of the worst things that can bring some of the best things out of it. So to me it was really interesting. And so Parliament is one that I highly recommend. I know it's just a building, but it is beautiful. It's kind of like when you go to London, you want to go visit Buckingham Palace or go visit Parliament. It's fantastic. It's really fantastic. So check that out. Look for tour guides. You can do private stuff as well as just showing up and doing a tour. Now, the second one I'm going to recommend is the River Danube. And, of course, it's just a river, right? And you can walk along it. But what I'm going to recommend about the River Danube is actually taking a nighttime cruise. You can take a little romantic cruise. If you have the family and the kiddos, not necessarily going to recommend the nighttime cruise for you, but there are daytime riverboat cruises that go up and down, which is a really nice break just to really enjoy the city. So when you're just wanting to relax, maybe you've done a lot of walking, maybe you just want to view the city from sitting down, this is a great way to do it. So you can kind of travel up and down the river, the Danube River, and you can see both sides, the Pest and the Buda side of the city, which is really great. But the romantic one, you can sit inside if it's too cold because they have these glass kind of windows that go above your head in some senses, kind of curve all the way around you. And you can get a glass of champagne or a drink of your choice, and you can sit there and you get to see stars and you go up and down and the city is lit up and it's really beautiful. So that's going to be my number 2. So a little river cruise on the Danube River is recommended. Number 3, and this one I was super excited about when I started researching. Budapest, going there, was going to the baths. I love the water, so anytime I can get in the water, I'm going to jump at the chance. And there's a lot of choices that you can make when it comes to finding a Hungarian bath. And I say that as if you're going to go in your room and get a bath. But the baths are one of the things to do there. And the one that I recommend is one of the bigger ones, but it is worth it. The Sachini Baths, which is the largest baths in Budapest, is located in the Pest, in the city park. It's huge. You're not going to miss it. It's huge neo-Baroque yellow courtyard in the baths are give it away. So when you're researching Hungarian baths, you can find the Sachini Baths, and you're going to notice them right away. There's the bright yellow and the Baroque style. And there's 21 different baths there that you can get into. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what they are, they're basically pools. There's different style of pools. There's a heated thermal pool. There's a cold pool that you can swim in. There's indoor ones. They have like bubbles and jets that come up, and you can float around, and it's very relaxing. You'll see a lot of locals go. They'll hang out and play chess or just talk. It's kind of like going to the Central Park and seeing everyone sitting around playing chess or just having a picnic. Well, in Hungary, you can go, in Budapest, you go to the baths and you just hang out. So it's really kind of great. I was completely in love with hanging out there. It was actually a cold day. It was pretty cool out. But being in the thermal baths, you didn't even feel getting in and out didn't bother you. It wasn't snowing or anything like that, but the thermal baths is just like getting into a controlled hot tub, but it 500 times the size. It was really great. Some of them are small, but they are massive pools. So you don't have to worry about like cramming in with people. There is so much room. Now I did, because I wanted to try it. I tried the cool baths and the long pool, because you can swim laps and things, and man, was that cold. It was actually colder than the air temperature outside. My wife wouldn't get in it, but I had to try it. So depending your style or states, whether you want to be inside or outside in the baths, it's your choice. I recommend trying them all. There's 21 different baths to try. The Sachini Bath House is the one that I'm going to recommend there in Budapest. There's so many, but do your research. I have two more recommendations before we jump into our break, but the next one I'm going to recommend is a little eerie, but it was very interesting. It's called the House of Terror. Now, the House of Terror is a museum, but it is a house that used to be the headquarters for the Nazi Party as well as the communists, the head of the Communist Party at one point. So both of those organizations at the time during history had their headquarters in this same location. So it's a little eerie, it's very surreal, and they have a tour that you can go through. And so if you get a little emotional about things like this might not be something that you want to put yourself through. I recommend it. It was very enlightening, and it was very surreal. I really don't know how anyone else to describe it, except that I was humbled. I was very humbled going in. It was interesting. I was a little terrified, to be honest, so I understand why it got its name, the House of Terror. But I felt like I grew for letting myself experience that and really learning about what had happened there. So, I mean, like I said, we learn from history, and I think that that's important. So I recommend it. But again, do your research, and if this is not for you, you may want to skip this entirely. But I'm going to recommend it. I'm going to recommend this, especially for all you history buffs out there. And the next one I'm going to mention, this is kind of one of my last big recommendations, was the Great Market Hall. And if you know anything about listening to my podcast, I am huge into food when I travel. I love it. I absolutely love it. I would talk about it all the time, how a place has their own style and what food they prepare and how they cook it and the ingredients and what is local. It makes for your travels. It makes experiencing that city, that location, and Budapest is no different. I already talked about how there's a lot of gamey meats, and they use paprika as a really big spice there. But the Great Market Hall is this incredible, it almost seems like an airplane hangar, but 5 times the size. So it's this dome. You almost think of it as one of those large, really unique architectural train stations that you could go to in Europe. But it's a marketplace, and it's so big. I don't even think you can do it all in one day, but there's food stands and local vendors and places, and the smells you get. If you're looking to get that paprika, or you're one of those people that likes to get souvenirs, they have little shops and they have local vendors there. You can get all the spices you want. You can get, if you haven't gotten that bottle of Tokai to take home, or even a different type of local bottle, you can find that there. You can get a great lunch just walking around, really seeing and being part of the culture there in Budapest, and the people makes it an extremely unique experience. And I highly recommend it. We went and we walked around, we bought our spices and a couple of things to take home with us, and then we got a great lunch. In fact, it was really hard to decide what to get for lunch because there were so many different smells and places that we wanted to try. So we did a little eclectic and got kind of a la carte style. We got something from different places all over and just kind of put our lunch together. So there you go. Those are some of the top things that I recommend while you're traveling there in Budapest. There's plenty others to look up. Those are my recommendations. So if nothing else, at least do those. So stick with us, because coming up after the break, we are going to talk about some of the accommodations, and I'm going to give you some great recommendations.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. We were just talking about some fabulous excursions and things that you need to do when experiencing Budapest. But now it's time to talk about those accommodations. Yes, we all have to stay somewhere when we travel, right? Whether you're a backpacker, a moderate traveler, or you are just used to the high-end luxury, Budapest has it all. You're going to find accommodations that will fit your budget no matter what your style is. So if you have that classical or traditional style that you like when traveling and staying in unique places, or you like the modern and you like all those amenities that you're really going to get, or you're needing to rough it, you just need a place to crash, you're going to be able to find those in Budapest, and I promise that if you look, they're going to come up. Now, I'm not the backpacker anymore. I have backpacked in my early years, but typically now when I travel, I look to be comfortable. I want to experience a traditional place typically, or unique place, I guess I should say. But I tend to lean more on the luxury side. So I'm going to give you two options here that when we were researching and looking for where to stay, this one went right to my wife, because as soon as she found this top place, which I'm about to talk about, there wasn't even a question. I wasn't allowed to make any other decisions. We were staying there. Didn't matter what the cost was. We were going to figure out a way to stay there. And you're not going to be surprised when I give you my number one recommendation. but there's a few reasons for that as well, not just with the name. So my top recommendation that I am going to put an absolute stamp of approval on is the Four Seasons Hotel, Gresham Palace, Budapest. And you're like, well, it's a Four Seasons. It's got to be great. Well, yes, the service is, the amenities is, it's luxury, it's high-end, it's a 5-star hotel. You're not going to find anything better. If you're looking for that top level of hotel in Budapest, let me just tell you, this will be your choice. This is going to be it. You don't have to try to find somewhere else unless you're staying with a more unique style of place. There are other luxury hotels, but this is going to be the number one. This is the best hotel in Budapest, in my opinion, and several others. And let me just tell you this. It is so highly regarded that when we were staying there, Prince Charles was doing an official visit to Budapest, and that's where they stayed. So Camilla and Prince Charles were there, and it was really kind of neat because we were staying at the same hotel. I think we had our reservation booked before then, but we would see them passing through the hotel and all their security. And in fact, it was a little annoying, to be honest. At one point, it was kind of neat at first. And then the longer that we ran into them, because Budapest is not as large a city as you think, their schedules seemed to be coinciding with our schedule of what we were doing or happened to be doing that day. And anytime that the royal family was in and about or passing through or traveling, we had to wait, and we were kind of put on hold, or they would stop transportation to let them pass and things like that. In the hotel, we were eating breakfast. I still remember the morning. We were eating breakfast, and fabulous breakfast that I probably would overpaid for, but it was so good. And we were sitting there eating breakfast, and they were coming down and leaving, and we were right by the window. And so we were about finished with breakfast, and we were trying to leave so we could go get our stuff to go on one of our tours that day. And they were leaving the hotel, and so we were told that we had to wait. So their service or Secret Service made us wait, and so there was only one entrance and exit that we were going out of from the dining room. And so we had to sit there and wait for them to load into their caravans and take off. And it wasn't just that they were walking, getting in and going. I think Camilla came down first, and she got into the car and then sat there, and Prince Charles wasn't there yet, so she was waiting around, and then he went down, was talking to his security detail about what was going on, and then he got in the car, and they didn't pull away right away. So we kind of got to witness this whole excursion and this whole circus of what was going on. And at first, it was very, very exciting, and then when we learned that all over the city that they were going and we were running into them, things just stopped and we had to wait for it. And so it kind of started to annoy me just a little bit. I understand it was an official visit. They're the royal family. I get it. But it was kind of putting in a cramp in what we were doing and our flow of our trip at the time. So it was a little tiring to run into. But I will say this before I move on from that. We were crossing the Chain Bridge, which is directly across from the Four Seasons. It literally, when you look out the front, the bridge crossing the river is right in front of you. So the location for this hotel is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's really in the middle of the city. You can't get any more centrally located between everything than this hotel. And we had decided that we were just going to walk. We didn't want to pay for a taxi and things like that. And it's a walking-friendly city. And we walked across the bridge, and I'm glad we were walking coming back that evening because they were coming back as well, and they were crossing the bridge, and his window was down, and I waved at him, and he waved right back at me. So that was what I would consider my experience with the royal family. Prince Charles, waved at me. I was within, probably 25 feet of him, and, that was, pretty cool. So I like that. I like that experience, but again, it was a little tiresome of the entourage that was going around the city. So that's the kind of caliber and type of people that are going to be staying at the Four Seasons Hotel, Gresham Palace in Budapest. So right away, you can kind of think of the level of luxury and security and the overall aesthetics of the location and the building in general. But I'm going to give you just a little bit of history because this is what makes it even more unique and I think worth paying that extra price to stay there. It's an art museum. I mean, it's called the Gresham Palace, and it's really an art museum, and the architecture in it alone is fantastic, and it has a lot of history. Now, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, it's facing the iconic Chain Bridge head on. I mean, it's right there, and you have the Buda Castle just in the backdrop of that. I mean, it's got that iconic spot there in Budapest that you can see, and it's so centrally located, as I mentioned earlier. It's historically a luxury hotel and has been for a while, as far as it being a hotel, but it's been a luxury building or a palace for a long, long time. And I'm going to go through just a little bit of history. Like I mentioned, I'm a history buff, so I'm going to go through a little bit of history on this. And the site was occupied by and hopefully I pronounce this correctly, the Nako House. It was a neoclassical palace that was built in 1827. So this building goes back to 1827. Now, the building itself, the hotel itself, that's not entirely the original. It has been rebuilt and refurbished and things like that. In fact, in 1880, the London-based Gresham Life Insurance Company bought the property. So that's where the name comes from. The Four Seasons Hotel Gresham Palace is based from that. And it was the Four Seasons that put the money in to make it into a hotel, and so they kept the name incorporated in that. And originally the palace served as an office building as well as a residence for senior staff for the Gresham Company. So it actually was not a hotel originally when it started out. During the occupation after World War II, it saw a lot of that happen, a lot of the residents and senior staffing of this insurance company. That's when it happened. So it was after World War II. But in 2001, the building was bought by the Irish Investment Company. And if I pronounce this, Quinlan Private is the company name. And there was an extensive rebuild of the structure, and it became this luxury hotel. So that's when it started. And so the Four Seasons with this Irish investment company came together, and they decided to preserve this piece of history and make it somewhere that people could experience. And that's what you're really getting out of this. Not only 5-star luxury, but you're getting to experience and be in a place that is so historical and stay there, which is really neat. It currently has 179 guest rooms, including 17 suites. So I was introduced to turn-down service by traveling to this place, because usually the places that I stay were very nice, but they didn't always offer turn-down service in the way that a 5-star luxury hotel does, where they made sure that your sheets were completely changed and your bed was folded down. They had the slippers ready, the nighttime chocolate, the lights were prepared to a certain level. It was just a lot of little details. And really that's what you pay for when you go to these luxury and stay in these luxury hotels, is you pay for those details, not just location. Yes, location, but the service that you get and the amenities that come with it and how it all comes together. So I'm highly recommending this. Now this, if you're a budget cautious person or you are traveling more on a budget, this is definitely not going to be the hotel that you're going to want to fork out the money for. It's going to be on the pricey side. Just so you know, we stayed, I think, only about 3, maybe 4 nights, or 3 nights, 4 days, something like that. It was worth every bit that we paid for. I enjoyed every moment that we were there. But again, you have to always think about what works for you, because when you travel, a hotel is really just a place that you're going to be sleeping. But if you're like me and likes to really experience the place that you're sleeping and staying, I recommend the Four Seasons there in Budapest. And for all the reasons I highlighted. I mean, just for the fact that it's centrally located makes it easy for you to get around to everything that you want to do. So, and that might alleviate some of your cost for taking taxis and some of the trams. But I do recommend jumping on the tram. It really helps out, especially if you're going to the baths or certain places like that. And we ended up getting a tour, like we did a tour in the city as well, and they picked us up right from our hotel, and we did a city tour, which, again, I recommend too because it gives you that history and that knowledge of the city. And I always recommend doing those city tours when you first arrive, because if you're not quite sure what you want to do, doing a city tour might open your eyes and let you decide that, oh, I want to check this out because I didn't know that about the city when I researched it originally. So that is always a recommendation that I give and something that we love to do. Now, if we've extensively researched the city and know really a lot more than we probably need to about traveling there, you can never know too much. But we might skip the city tour unless it just is financially a better way to see the city, because sometimes it makes it easier when you just get to go to certain places when you know you don't want to spend a lot of time. And this gives you that chance to do that while getting to see other areas of the city and the transportation is taken care of. Sometimes it makes it really easy. But you can do a city tour and they'll pick you up from this hotel in front. So you don't have to even travel anywhere to get picked up for your city tour. So there you go. That is my number one recommendation as far as a stay. Now, we did look at other locations and other hotels before staying, and I'm going to throw out one other recommendation, which is a little more budget-friendly, but it's still a very unique and what I consider I consider a luxury hotel, but it's not quite as high as the Four Seasons. And it's called the Petit Maison, and it's an extension of the boutique hotel. It's only 150 feet from the main building and the reception. So it's a little separate. So it's not right next door, but so you have to check in and then you have to travel over to it. But it makes a very unique experience. It's beautiful. It's a mix of this modern with a really classical style. It's infused. It's really unique. And I highly recommend you checking this one out, especially if you like more of those modern style hotels. This gives you a nice flavor for like an old and new put together. And they're very unique rooms. So if you're someone that enjoys like the style of the room, just having its own identity in the style of the place, it's one that I would recommend. The Petit Maison has a cafe on the ground floor and 8 spacious rooms on 2 floors overlooking a garden, like a garden courtyard. It has a continental breakfast, which is great. And let me just say, most continental breakfasts in Europe are much better, in my opinion, than what we would consider a continental breakfast in the U.S. here. The pastries and the cheeses and just the things that they offer tend to be, in my opinion, a lot more fresh, a lot better. It's not about quantity, it's about the quality. And not everywhere, but I've traveled around the U.S. domestically, and I tend to find that when I travel in Europe, their continental breakfasts are delicious, and they satisfy me without having to go out and have a full-length breakfast, and they prepare me for the day. So I really love that style. So they have the courtyard, and it's right there. Again, it's served in their cafe, and it's complimentary. So there you go. It's a complimentary for your guests that are staying there at the Petit Maison, right? And like I said, it has 8 spacious rooms. They are spacious, but there's only 8. So if you're going during a busy or high time, then you may want to consider, booking in advance. So there's 24-hour front desk. There's a 24-hour front desk at the property. And the chain bridge is a little over half a mile from the Maison Bistro and Hotel, while the Buda Castle is maybe a little bit more, but roughly about a little over half a mile too from the property. So you're kind of in a good spot as far as big iconic things to go travel to. So again, being central in Budapest is, my opinion, a key when picking your place to stay, which is why this is my other second recommendation. And it's a little budget friendly. It's about $100 a night. If you're looking for more of the backpacker style, this may be too much for you, but I feel like $100 a night is pretty reasonable considering the amenities you get and the level of quality that you're going to get with this petite hotel. So there you go. Those are my 2 recommendations. There's so many others, but I'm going to stick with those 2. Coming up after the break, we're going to jump into my top 10 tips for staying safe while traveling, so don't miss it.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. We were just discussing my recommended hotels to stay at while in Budapest. Now, thank you for sticking around to the end because I know you guys are in anticipation of this, but I'm going to jump in and give you my top 10 tips for staying safe while traveling. That's right. Now, some of these you might already know, and they might be common sense. You know, a lot of times when we talk about tips and tricks about traveling, they really can be some common sense things, but there's so much going on, and when we're traveling and so many different and new things being thrown at us, we can sometimes forget about some of these, or we're just in a rush for preparation of doing things that we normally don't do on a regular basis for those of us that are just the occasional traveler, that we can forget about these things. So I'm going to give you a top 10 list, and hopefully you're already doing these things. If not, I would recommend you looking into them. All right. So number 10 I'm going to jump into is public Wi-Fi. So I avoid public Wi-Fi. I really do. I tend to travel with a hotspot of my own when I travel, because public Wi-Fi can make it easy for people to hack into your information stored on your phones and laptops and things like that. It really does. Everything is so digital now, and when you use public Wi-Fi, you kind of go for that risk. And the fact is that our phones have so much security on them, and there's so many things that we have that are now on our phones or our laptops, that when those things are hacked, it really can be a very scary thought if that's going to happen. So, a portable router that you can get, or a hotspot, is something that I recommend when traveling. And sometimes, depending where you're going, you may not need the technology. I mean, with your phone, I get it because you carry a lot on there, but maybe you leave that laptop at home unless you're doing filming, or you want to make sure you upload things, or you're having to do some work, or you're someone that takes 1,000 pictures and you need somewhere to upload them. I would bring an SD card or some kind of something that you can upload, or clear out some space on your iCloud or something like that, and upload those things. So any chance you can to take less expensive things or not travel with as many expensive things is always a recommendation. But I understand. I'm one of those that loves to travel with my laptop because I like to do research sometimes, or if I'm doing some work at night. So for me, I tend to take it. But public Wi-Fi, just be aware that that is a possibility. All right. Number 9, your phone. We kind of already touched on this a little bit, but your phone stores a lot of information, okay? And let's just even talk about it. You guys already know these things. It has access to your emails, credit card information, IDs, photos and things like that. There's bank apps on there. There's so many things that you have on your phone, and these days on your digital device, whatever device you're using. And according to CSNBC, only 48% of respondents password protect their smartphones. Only that's not a high number in my opinion. So, one, password protect those smartphones. I mean, just in general, because if you lose it, then your information is free reign to someone who picks up your smartphone. So that's just a common sense thing. It's you also want to put a tracking device or set that up on your phone, because a lot of the phones these days have ways, if you lose it, to have a tracking device enabled on that. So if you can report it stolen and use the tracking device, you may be able to recover it. So those are just things to be aware of, especially when we use our phone for everything, pictures, paying now. It's just kind of crazy. But password protect, okay? Number eight. This is something that a lot of us are not good at, and I can be guilty of this as well. Don't post location or your agenda on social media. Don't post where you're going and your agenda on social media. I mean, if you have a large following, especially for those of you that like to publicly put out exactly what you're doing, where you're at, it also makes it easier for people to track you. And if some reason hacked into your phone and happens to be in the same area, or there's a way to track you and know what you're doing, especially if you're someone that is of note, or you have a little bit of celebrity status, or you're traveling. By posting where you're going and what your agenda is, you're going to attract people anyway. And most people in the spotlight are very good about this, but just in general, for everyone who travels, I don't think it's really smart to do that, just in general. It also lets people know that you're not home. So when you're posting that you're going there, you're on trips, or you're traveling there, right away people that hack your things or see you or know you, they know you're not there. So that kind of leaves it open season for your home, while you're away. So just be aware of that when you're doing that, okay? Number seven, ready? Bring only what you need. I kind of talked about this again. Some of these have some correlation with each other, but bring what you need and lock up what you don't. And that doesn't necessarily mean on the trip itself, but it can be. Like, if you don't need to have that laptop, why bring it? It's just one more thing you have to be concerned about, locked up or while you're traveling in your backpack and not losing it, But if you need it or you bring it, that's fine. But while you're on vacation, lock it up. And that's why I also recommend that you look at those hotels that have a safe. And if they don't, find a way to make sure you always have your bag with you if you can't lock it up. Also, not just electronics and high-end things like that, but your passports and your social security cards. You have to have your passport. Don't bring your social security card. I don't know why a lot of people do this. I've heard of people doing this. I don't understand it. But make a photocopy. Scan it. Same thing with your passport. Once we use our passports, they go and we secure them as best we can. And we then use our photocopied passports of our passports to go around or check into hotels and places. Only time that we get our passports back out are when we travel through the airports. So, don't bring your passport with you when you're traveling. If you need a form of ID and your driver's license isn't going to work, which when you're traveling overseas and internationally most likely will not, but have a photocopy of your passport and of your Social Security, but I wouldn't bring your Social Security photocopy. I would use that for an emergency situation. But a copy of your passport, a photocopy, because someone that finds a photocopy of your passport is not going to necessarily be able to use that somewhere, even if they change it's paper. So it's not going to last. So you're better off with that or losing that versus your actual passport. Because, guys, it is a pain in the butt to lose your passport. I lost it in my passport when I was traveling in Australia on a train. I left it. Don't know what happened to it. You have to go to the embassy. You have to, it's a process, and it just does not add any fun to your vacation. And if you're on a short vacation, it's not going to add, it's going to be a lot that you have to deal with. So just don't do it. Just don't bring it. Make sure it's secure, okay? Also, limit your credit cards that you're bringing, okay? When I say bring only what you need, don't bring every credit card, okay? Don't bring every credit card. It's not a good thing. You can monitor your bank and credit card accounts, easily just to make sure. So if something, for some reason, happens, you can contact your bank and things like that. Also, it's just a safe thing, because if you bring, the more you have to try to keep track of. And if you're bringing multiple credit cards and you don't need all those credit cards, then it's just more to keep track of, and there's a higher chance of you actually losing one. So why not limit that and only bring what you need? All right, Number five, before you leave on your trip, stop your mail delivery. Okay? Either do that or tell a neighbor who you trust. I always say let a trusted neighbor or family member, let them know you're gone so that they can get your mail. Because that is a dead giveaway to anyone that wants to break in and is looking for someone that's not home. If they have a pile of mail, make sure you stop those newspapers, or again, have your neighbor move them so they're not in visible sight. Because if you walk by a residence or an apartment and you just see papers or mail that's just stacking and up, obviously you're going to go, they're not home. Or maybe something's wrong. So one of two things needs to happen. You need to knock on the door and check on them, or there's a chance that someone will notice that they're not there. And then, of course, you're miles and miles away or across the sea, wherever you're at, and there's not much you can do at that point. So make sure you stop your mail delivery, or let your trusted neighbor or family member know you're gone so they can kind of help take care of that. And no one wants to see that ficus die while you're on your trip, so water your plants, And make sure your pets are taken care of. I always have to say that because we're very big about that. We have pets, so I'm going to throw that one out there for sure. Make sure your pet's taken care of. Make sure they're at you board them, or you have someone that you trust that's taking care of them. Don't just leave them by yourself and dump a lot of food in there. That's not really great, because they have to go to the bathroom sometime, and you don't want to come home to food everywhere and bathroom. No, it's just not good. So take care of those things before you leave. All right, moving into my top 5. All right, here we go. So that was my number 5. This is my number 4. Learn common travel scams. This is pretty simple. When you find out where you're going, with the internet these days, you can look up and find almost anything, research a little bit, but learn those travel scams so that you are not taken when you get to those places. Because every place has their own typical travel scams. Some of them are universal. Some of them are very particular to that area that you're traveling in. The broken taxi meter, or the ring scam in Paris. There's a lot of things like that. So just make sure that you're researching that and not falling victim to any local scam, because when you are found as a tourist, or they know that you're a tourist, you are susceptible to things like that. It's how the world is. It really is, right? All right, so number three. This one is something that I think is really important, especially these days. Register with the embassy, okay? The Smart Traveler Enrollment Program from the U.S. Department of State is designed to make a destination local embassy aware of your arrival and to keep you constantly updated with the latest safety information. It's free. Right there, boom, it's free. So it's not like you have to pay for this. It's available for all U.S. citizens and nationals living abroad. And it's a great way to get reliable, up-to-date safety information as you travel, too. So registering with the embassy is a good thing. It lets them know that you're there. If something goes wrong, like we talked about earlier, losing that passport, from personal experience, guys, it's not fun. It is a headache to deal with. But it could make that situation a little bit easier. So register with your embassy. Number, I lost count actually, to be honest, but so we're in our top 3. I'm going to link this in with kind of what I talked about earlier. Stop using your back pocket for your wallet. It's a habit. A lot of us, and I'm one of those, I use a back pocket for a wallet a lot, but when you travel, don't do it. And you have to break that habit. Even if you have that zipper or that button, just don't put that wallet in your back pocket. You are going to get pickpocketed, or there's a chance it's going to fall out, or something's going to happen. Just don't do it. That's pure. Just don't do it. All right, so my top 2 here. My top 2, because I lost count. Thanks for bearing with me on that, guys. But my top 2 things. Number 2, hide emergency cash. So a lot of us like to travel with cash, so it makes it easier. These days, I personally like using credit cards and traveling that way because you have transactions of everything. You also aren't taken for having to deal with if someone is actually giving you a fair price on when you're buying certain things. It just makes things a lot easier. But hide emergency cash and having some cash when you travel is always a good thing because not everywhere takes credit card. But always have a little bit of cash hidden. That way, if you lose a bag or something, or something happens and someone takes your money, you have a little bit of extra emergency cash to help you out in that situation. Okay? And number 10, or I guess not my number one, from my top 10 list, the number one thing is to travel in numbers. Travel in numbers is always a safe thing. If you are someone that backpacks and does things a lot by yourself, I recommend you traveling in numbers or be very familiar and aware of your surroundings. That's got to be the biggest thing. If you're not traveling in numbers, be very aware of your surroundings. But I'm going to recommend, and a lot of people will recommend this, traveling in numbers. It's just the safer way to do it. And if you are by yourself and you're traveling with a group and you go off by yourself, let someone know where you're going. That way they can retrace your steps, or if something happens, they can talk and let someone know the last time they talked to you. You don't want anything to happen to you. So traveling in numbers is always a safe bet. So there you go. Those are my top 10 safety tips for when you are traveling. I hope you have been inspired to take a trip this year or look to start planning one. It's never too late to start traveling, guys. It can open our eyes to new experiences, even unlock things about ourselves that we never knew. I believe everyone should travel and explore more of what this world has to offer. It can give us an appreciation and love for so many things. So let's get traveling.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.